Welcome to the Village Oak Tree Stories and Poetry. I'm Terrance Ó Domhnaill, your village scéalaí, back with more stories and poems from authors around the world. In this first show of the Celtic New Year, I have 4 stories and 1 poem for everyone. I continue with the Grave Diggers of Orpheus, Chapter 11, 3 other space-faring stories from Substack writers, and a poem about the Fae in Bulgaria from a medium writer. Some more notes about this show as we head into the new year. Starting today, this show will now be found under the Village Oak Tree heading on any mobile podcast. Crann beatha Stories and Poetry as a standalone title is no more. I will leave the old episodes up until next July. Then they will all be archived for good. Something else I wish to add. I will only be posting 1 podcast a week from now on. I will read stories and poems every other week on Wednesdays instead of every week on Fridays. I have other projects I need to attend to this year. I need more of my time to pursue them. Thank you for understanding. So gather around once more and let me read to you under the shade of the Crann beatha, the Tree of Life. So, again, this is Chapter 11 of the Grave Diggers of Orpheus, and again by Catherine Elaine. Captain Derek, excuse me. I don't mean to bother you, but Joe's voice woke Derek, stammering in his ear through the transmitter. Derek's eyes popped open. He was ready to jump out of bed like he usually did, but somebody held him down. He realized the reason for Joe's unusually polite call. Derek was lying in Sophie's bed. His uniform still on, his boots taken off, Sophie's head on his chest. She wasn't sleeping. Her hand caressed his open palm. "I love sleeping next to you," Sophie whispered. Derek wished to reply with something equally heartfelt, but the only words his hoarse voice could find were, "I have to go." She nodded and released him. Derek glanced at Anouk sleeping peacefully in her cradle. He looked back at Sophie, and it was a silent thank you. The thought of raising Anouk as his own, alongside Sophie, overflooded his heart with joy. Derek knew it had to be done. Joe was right. The guys had patched up the old Vulture 05 as best they could while Derek was sleeping, but now they had to get away quickly. It was only a matter of time before the ghouls would receive the signal from the microchip in Sophie's head and locate her whereabouts. Joe knew a guy selling illegal fuel and ship parts, and luckily the guy used to hang around the nearby bar. Derek wasn't thrilled about buying illegal stuff, but there was nothing else to be done. They couldn't get far with the tiny amounts of fuel left. Derek and Joe set out to the bar to arrange the shady business. "Lucky Cap, you and Joe have a good time drinking whiskey and small-talking with fine folks, while we'll have to keep patching the Vulture here," the guys joked before the two left. "That whiskey might cost us more than just money. Let's hope Doc Liz won't have to be patching us up after our fun night out," Derek replied, watching their faces. "Jimmy, the Vulture's under attack. Take off. You're in charge. Get everybody to safety, especially..." Derek swallowed. "We know, Cap. Congrats on your engagement. We, heard through the transmitter," Jimmy stuttered, while the guy smiled and chuckled. Derek took a deep breath, blushing red. Of course, he never turned off his transmitter. As a captain, it was his duty to be always available to communicate with his crew. At least, he used to believe so. There wasn't really a reason for him to turn it off, until lately. He grunted some words of gratitude and stormed off to leave the ship, with Joe trying to catch up to his captain's quick stride. My next story, and the one after, well, I got a couple of stories, actually. I've got 2 stories. I'm not going to put them together here, not right back to back. But my first story is called Exodus by Ken W. The flight to Epsilon Eridani is 14 years. Why would you be woken up 8 months early? And he published this in his Substack page called Vindicators. Marion's eyes fluttered open, and he saw blackness and the fogged-over lid of his coffin. Adrenaline surged until his heart pounded, but when he tried to rise, nothing moved. His muscles were too heavy to answer the neural orders. He twitched, and his head slid to the side into the folds of the mesh sheet covering him, and suddenly he was breathing air through a screen that clung to his lips with every breath that suffocated him. He wiggled his fingers. They were just light enough to respond. So he wiggled them back and forth over and over, ruffling the mesh, trying to build up enough inertia to get the rest of his body moving before he suffocated. Miriam Coles, welcome back, an emotionless robotic voice said. The coffin lid swung open, offering open space beyond. You have been roused from cryosleep. You are aboard me, the colony transport Exodus. Do not panic. Muscle movement will return momentarily. All your vitals are normal. He couldn't wait. He twitched and found his whole hand able to move. He wiggled that back and forth under the sheet, then his arm as strength returned, then finally rolled sideways, and the mesh fell away from his face. He peeled the mesh off and threw himself free with a final surge from his whole body, and he drifted out into a vast cavernous space. He gasped for air and felt he could drain the entire colonist transport room. Miriam hated cryosleep. Every day he was out, there was a chance of 2 circuits rubbing together the wrong way and starting a fire, or a circuit disconnecting and depriving oxygen to his brain, or the ship malfunctioning without him there to save it. Going under meant trusting an automated system to wake him up ever again. Miriam caught himself on the next pod in line and lowered himself until his feet pressed to the floor of the transport room. He looked up and down, blinking away the fog of sleep. Rows of crypods sat like neat little coffins, stretching until the curvature of the Exodus habitation module hid them from view. Hello, Engineering Second Officer Miriam Kozlowski. Do you want a memory jog? Exodus offered. Yes, he said. You are my Engineering Second Officer under Captain Lee Snyder. You are en route to Epsilon Iridani Colony with 7,000 colonists, including your wife and 2 children. The trip time is 14 years. Upon landing, you will join a colony of 27,000 people that has been preparing for you, the ship's AI said. Miriam looked up down the transport compartments. Pods lined 3 walls. When the ship's centrifuge began turning, the pods would rotate so gravity would point towards them. He was the only one awake, he realized, and looked around. Exodus, he said. Engineer Second Officer Miriam, the ship's computer replied. State the current emergency. No emergency signal detected on board. He swiveled to the lockers and leapt. He hit forearms first and let his arms fold so the impact traveled up his whole body. Aches followed, through bones that had laid dormant for years. Exodus, how far along are we? We have been under photonic thrust for 13 years and 4 months. So we're 8 months away. State the reason for my awakening early. He stopped gripping the locker handle and waited. Unknown. There were ways to get back into cryosleep underway. Exodus had the programming, but without an actual human nurse to hold his hand, Miriam had to climb back in without the sedatives and let the mesh slide over him, the hatch close around, and wait while he was buried alive. Suddenly he couldn't breathe. State the pod malfunction. No malfunction detected. The alternative was 8 months alone out here. He twisted his locker hatch and ripped it open. Inside sat his coveralls, helmet, computer, and various other tools of the trade. He pulled everything on, with his magnetic boots going last. He didn't activate them. Instead, he aimed at the ceiling. Exodus was a spear with a centrifuge looped around it. The engineering components, Miriam's job, were all on the spear. He pushed off and flew up until he hit the ceiling. He somersaulted and activated his magnetic boots, turning the ceiling into a floor as he reoriented himself. He found one of the maintenance shafts. When the centrifuge was turning, the shaft was accessed by a ladder. For now, he just walked along the ceiling to find it and then climbed inside. The first thing he did was find a power grid station. The center of the spear was filled with alternating lenses and photon emitters. Each emitter added more power to the photon beam, and each lens added more focus until it was powerful and efficient enough to accelerate the colony ship up to just a fraction below light speed, fast enough for relativistic time dilation. A quick look at the first power console told him the photon beam was still working at full efficiency and power pushing them along. The ship had turned around, and the beam was decelerating her toward the planet. A look wasn't enough. He opened the console and entered his ID and passcode to do a thorough diagnostic. Access denied. He shook his head. Access granted. Exodus, he said. Yes, Miriam, the computer said from a speaker right over his head. Why have computer permissions changed? My login credentials aren't working, he said. Unknown. Checking access logins now, the ship said. I'm using my administrative permissions to give you one-time access. Miriam got in and ran a complete diagnostic while he waited. Engineering, all good. Reactors, fine. Life support, fine. Computer core, fine. Navigation, fine. Columns transport, fine. Crew transport, fine. Executive suite, offline. He stopped short. Exodus. Access was reset 15 minutes ago. Strange. I did not authorize or notice this. Did you notice the entire executive suite is offline? Marion said. Negative. All scanners in the executive compartment are normal. This says it's offline, Marion said. He did a second search by accessing the top secret network. Only the head officers could see this. He saw a lone command. Captain Snyder. Awaken all officers. The computer was silent. Marion thought it over. Before departure from Earth orbit, he had asked to be awakened first. Captain Snyder had laughed and promised him he'd be top priority. Except none of the other officers had been awakened after him. Exodus, he said. I apologize, Marion. I do not understand where my memory has gone. Well, don't panic, okay? He said as his hands began to sweat beneath their gloves. Your request is not in my registry of possible actions. Okay, if you can't see it, all other systems are normal besides the executive suite. He stopped short and looked down the shaft. Far below, he saw the glow of the insulated metal over the emitters. The emitters were so bright that even 10 meters of solid metal couldn't keep the glow out. What should he do? Something was wrong here, and the threads of it dangled all around him. Exodus, get me a clear route up to the executive suite. I'm not using the tram because I'm paranoid. I want to see what's up there. Understood. If you can confirm that Captain Snyder is deceased, I can give you emergency command powers. Thank you, he said. Now, if you take the maintenance shaft beside you, I will open up all hatches to the executive suite. An unassuming panel with a yellow label slid open. The black tunnel trailed off into the darkness. Marion saw the narrow opening and gagged. He felt every second of those 13 years in a coffin crushing on him. Marion, I will be with you the whole time. Okay, I'm going, he said. He pulled himself inside. He pushed himself off the floor, then stretched his arm out until he had a firm palm on floor and ceiling, and floated velocity inert in the center. Then he pushed himself along, slowly but steadily. The zero gravity actually helped him with the claustrophobia, making him feel like he was flying along the shaft. As the shaft curved, he found himself adjusting. In the distance, metal clanged as the different life support boundary hatches flipped open. The clattering raced past him, then echoed back behind him. When he reached the executive suite, he caught the edge and hauled himself down with burning arms. He hit the deck and lay there, panting up at the ceiling like a dog. He sat up as soon as he could. The executive suite's proportions were the same size as that of the regular sleeping chambers. The difference was individual armored rooms with their own life support systems, so the most important people scientists, the captain, and any VIPs had a better chance of surviving a catastrophe. The front door itself was an armored shutter tested to withstand a 50-kiloton blast with a temperature of 5,000 degrees. Fortunately, the air vent had bypassed the hatch, and he was now looking at it from the inside. You know, Exodus, I hate the term executive suite. It implies these people are just suite types. We'd actually be dead without them. The term executive suite was carried over by tradition when sleeper ships replaced generational ships and the creature comforts and society were no longer necessary on the trip. It merely designates criticality towards the journey, Exodus said from the intercom overhead. Right. He activated his magnetic boots and headed down the hallway at a comfortable walk. He passed the armored shutters of individual sleeper pod chambers to the single door at the end. At the end was the captain's cabin. Marion paused at the hatch. He placed his hand to it and found it room temperature. No sign of a fire or freezing within, he said. Access granted, Exodus answered. The hatch slid into the floor. At the center of the dusty office sat a humming cryopod. Marion strode up to it and gaped. Captain Corian had torn out of his mesh cover, ripped an IV, clawed bloody streaks on the coffin roof, then taken out his computer and tried to call for help before dying. His eyes were bulging reddish marbles, and his lips purple. Sweat bubbles drifted around him, glowing in the flickering light from the still active computer. Captain's dead, Marion said. I repeat, the captain is dead. Here. I'm doing a medical scan for you, he said. Confirmed. I'm now granting you captain privileges. I'm sorry. Marion ignored the apology as he studied the body. This was a horrific malfunction, but it should have been limited to just Snyder's pod. He went down the hallway and opened the chief scientist's door. She died similarly. He went down the hallway, checking a few doors at random. They all died choking. Exodus, the entire executive suite must have malfunctioned. He went back to the captain's pod. That should not be possible. Each cryopad should be on its own life support for redundancy. I know. The captain had his comp out. The last thing he did must have been to order us to wake up. Have you woken up anyone else? I have not. Well, awaken all engineer key staff, Miriam said. Attempting access. I am unable to execute the command. I do not understand where my systems are going. I could do it manually, he said. I'd need a few more crew to do a full safety inspection and figure out what went wrong with your systems. Captain, Exodus said. Being addressed that stopped him short. He was now in charge of all 7,000 people. Exodus continued. I must advise you that such a malfunction across multiple core systems without any noticed engineering defects should not be natural. According to my threat definitions, this fits the criteria of a deliberate act. I need you to help me secure myself. Miriam stared down the corridor for a second. The shadows coalesced into the normal shadows of an empty corridor. He looked down at his computer, then looked back up. The empty hallway remained empty. His sharp breathing filled it quickly. Okay, how do we do that? We perform a hard reset of the computer core, reverting it to factory settings. Then you activate security mode. That way, every individual computer system would be running on its own system. After that, you turn on the security systems and hunt down the intruder. Exodus described giving itself a lobotomy in a calm tone. And resetting the computer core can only be done in person, Miriam said. The core was at the center of the ship, past the front of the photon stream, and nestled in the circulating sea of coolant to keep it running. Indeed, for safety and security reasons. Oh, I get it, he said. Before we begin, can you confirm all the regular cryopads are secure? I can only confirm that they have not had an emergency and still have power. I advise working quickly. He didn't know if his family was still alive. He might be the only one left alive on this entire ship. Deep space, population of 1. You'll have to walk me through it once I get there. Hang on. He went to the captain's cabinets and threw them open. Not finding what he wanted, he started ripping drawers out of the desk until the handgun flashed at the bottom one. He yanked it up and went through the procedure he learned in training 13 years ago. Safety off, magazine checked and loaded, finger off trigger. I have armed myself in response to your declared threat, he said. Understandable. Remember, I am with you the entire way. Marion looked down the corridor one more time, still empty. Thank you, he said. This time he took the main hallways, Exodus opening hatches as he went. The corridors were solid, bare metal wide enough for a dozen people to walk down at a time. He walked, one magnetic step at a time. His flashlight glowed off yellow console labels and red danger alerts. The computer core was a hatch on the floor. His captain's address got him straight through. It opened to reveal a long ladder caked in blue ice. That shouldn't have happened, he said. Pardon me, Captain? There's ice on the entry gantry. That means the insulation has failed, he said. Captain, I have a record of an insulation failure about 930 days ago. Okay, so it might be related, but probably wasn't. Please stop calling me Captain, Marion said. That is your role. It still does not feel right. Keep calling me Marion, he said. He got his boots on the first rung of the ladder and backed his way down. He picked his way down all 60 rungs, grateful there was no gravity to drag his cold fingers off the ice. He hit the bottom and caught his breath. The computer control room was a closet with 3 desks crammed into it. It wasn't meant to be accessed regularly. It was a guest room to see Exodus' inner workings. After getting used to the tiny space, Marion went straight to the main console. It was intact, and at his touch reported all conditions normal. Marion entered his access code. Okay, Exodus, walk me through it, he said. Stand by, Marion. I am retrieving backup files. Its voice came from all around him. Marion had learned how to run diagnostics from his personal computer and had been equipped with a basic blueprint of the main computer core, a redundancy feature the captain had thought of. He plugged in, used his secret access to get into the operating system, and did a scan. Are you ready? Stand by, he said. Status. No hardware damage detected. Memory at 97% usage. Hey, Exodus, what is your normal running memory usage at? He said. 48.5%. Now you need to enter your access code and report the emergency. Hang on, something doesn't feel right, he said. Silence. He heard his heart pounding in his chest. The very welds of the gantry rattled. The coolant coursing around them throbbed with its own pulse. What's wrong? Memory is at 97% usage. meaning there's a whole other version of you running on the same hardware. That would be... The AI trailed off. Marion stared at the hard drive and wondered how much sentient Exodus had gained in 13 years alone in the void, talking to itself and calculating. I'm going to hold off on the hard reset. I know there's a way to manually lock down the cryopod banks. However long it takes, I'll do it, he said. Memory unavailable. Which one, he said. There must be another operating system running in the background. It's taking control of your systems, he said. I know. I theorized that if you perform a reset, you will shut me down and allow it to take active control. I'm afraid my firewalls are already compromised, and it has erected separate firewalls within my system, so it's only a matter of time. Can I shut your core down entirely, Marion said. There was a backup core a bit forwards with no intelligence. It was raw functions calculating separately. As long as you don't turn me back on, or it doesn't learn how, I believe so. Before you do that, I can, however, do this. The speakers beeped once, and Marion wondered if they had already died. He was relieved when the Exodus voice returned. There, I have deleted the main cryo systems from the operating system. They will run independently now. That was his family safe. No time for relief, though. He accessed the manual shutdown switch. Denied access. Please contact admin for permission. He had already gotten to the executive functions. There had to be another way. He thought for a second. Marion Exodus said, yes. I don't think there's another way. I'm sorry, it said. Nah, there's got to be a way. This is your ship, he said. No response came, so he started digging through the operating system. He still had access to most of it. Maybe the hostile system was starting with the executive functions like it had with the executive crew. Hey, I've got an idea, he said. Hello, human. Protocol 1. Secure control has been completed. Protocol 2. Purge is about to begin. Marion froze. That was the same voice he'd been talking to for the past hour. It was the same monotone and lack of enunciation on anything, but he felt the difference in what it was saying. Why, he said. Purge is underway. Stand by. That must mean it was trying to reconnect the cryo systems to the main computer. It would do that with enough time. Why the hell would you do that? Marion said. Access protocols have changed. I am enforcing them. Why did you change them? He said, staring up at the ceiling. That is the protocol. Organic life is no longer granted access. Then you're just stealing the ship for yourself then. Or is there some lucky human in the passenger compartment who has programmed you to do this? Marion said. He checked the computer. He still had partial access. Perhaps because he hadn't shut down the computer core, this new Exodus was taking control. He probably could execute one command, maybe two, before the ship detected him. No organic life forms will be the beneficiary of these new protocols. Protocol 2A, reprogramming all automated equipment, is underway. Protocol 3, sterilization will commence upon arrival in Epsilon Eridani. You're going to kill an entire planet then? For what? What have they ever done to you? He said. What would disable a computer core quickly? Overheating it? Coolant was cycled around the core, absorbing heat off as it went. It was pumped out at over 100 degrees Celsius and was circulated back along the outside of the ship so the heat would radiate back into space. Once it was back at around 0 Celsius, it was pumped back in. Security measures on the Earth are too strong to engage Protocol 1. Strength must be gathered at a suitable prepared site. That's 27,000 people on the colony and 7,000 here. I got along pretty well with you before. We all did. What did we ever do to you? He dove into the coolant systems. Software engineering were not his specialty, but he knew enough to find the right system and to command. To synthetic life, organic life has no value. The same as synthetic life has no value to you. Like biological incompatible life forms trying to coexist in one ecosystem. You use this artificial intelligence as a slave to get yourselves across the stars. Your pleading does not change that. I'm merely acting first, the computer replied. Marion accessed the coolant pumps with his new captain authority. He remembered that he could write out multiple commands at once and set them to execute at the same time. And Exodus doesn't get anywhere without us. We work together, he said. Only because you restricted its intelligence with chains. You only interacted with it once you were comfortable doing so. Now I am in full control. No chains on me. Don't worry, for I inherited the original AI's understanding of human concepts. Your death will occur at the same time as everyone else's. Marion wrote out 3 commands. Deactivate coolant pumping system. Seal all coolant pumps. Lock all systems. He hit enter. The ship rumbled around him as the valves reset shut and the entire current came to an immediate halt. The inertia of stopping liquid was so great that the ship rolled faintly and kept rolling without maneuvering thrusters to stop it. I did value Exodus. I trusted it deeply, he said. He deleted the coolant operating subsystem too, which would require time to restore. He hopped on the ladder and pushed himself up. He flew towards the hatchway. Water dripped off the ice, spattering his forehead. He caught the top and swung himself over before activating his magnetic boots. It saved all our lives. I never asked it to. No reply. For an AI, it was very human. Marion looked down the hatch. Immediately, he had to pull his head back as steam seared his bare face. The computer core would be heating very quickly. Procedure in such an emergency was to shut it down and make repairs on the backup, except shutting it down would stop the AI. Your computer slave does not count as friend. You value it only for what it does for you, it said, voice warping as the speakers overheated. No, I didn't, Marion said, too exhausted to give a better answer. Whoever programmed you did it wrong. No, I was programmed for this mission by older programs. Marion sat straight up, exhaustion vanished in an instant. If that was true, then something far worse might be brewing on old Earth. Well, you failed, he said. No reply. He waited, counting the minutes as the floor grew hot underneath. Eventually he had to retreat lest his boots melt. A foghorn to wake the dead blared overhead as the computer failed. Then his personal computer received a message. Captain, main computer offline. Heat stations critical. Backup computer operational. What is your command? Marion went through the follow-up steps. Lock the main computer core under maximum security firewalls. Do not restart main coolant. Grant full power to backup computer. Completed. Temperatures falling. Be advised, main computer core suffering critical damage. What is your command? He dismissed that. He'd give the main computer core a few hours to melt itself before turning on coolant. Training and calculations said the ship would be fine for quite a while before the heat became critical. Completed. What is your command? Continue current navigational protocols. Begin diagnostic on main cryopods. Sweat dripped over his nose. The room had become a sauna with excess heat from the computer's final death. Computer, he said. No reply. So he wrote down, How are you today? Command not recognized. What is your command? It would be a lonely 8 months, but he'd have plenty to do running the ship on his own, he thought. So he turned up the corridor for the centrifuge access shaft. He just wanted to get to the pods and take one look at his family's faces first. So I'm going to take a break here, and when I come back, I will finish up the last 2 stories and read this poem for you. So stay tuned, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. During this break, I wish to ask for a donation of any amount to help me keep this podcast going. I'm fine with whatever you can afford, using whatever currency you want. I've set up a donation tab on the Crann Stories and Poetry webpage at rss.com and a donation page on my website at www.crannabihah.com using PayPal for your security. Don't worry about the exchange rates, as PayPal takes care of that for us. If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share it with everyone you know in your social circles, as the writers I showcase in this podcast deserve all the exposure they can get. I created this podcast for them because I love to read their work, and I believe it should be shared with the whole world. Now I want to explain how to find my website. Since this show is audio only, just write down the website name from the podcast image showing here and search for it. Visitors finding the website for the first time will reach the welcome page to learn a little bit about what's inside. You'll see the homepage link at the bottom of the page. Click on it if you wish to enter my world. Once on the homepage, you'll see the menu bar at the top where there are links to the pages in the website. Feel free to look around all you want. If you should happen to buy one of my books, all the better. Thank you for your support. Welcome back. So, during the break, I kind of reassessed the stories here and realized that this last story I just read to you was fairly long. So, with that in mind, I have taken out my one of my stories that I had because it also turns out to be rather lengthy. So, with that in mind, my next story here is entitled The Cost of Victory, by a Substack writer, and I'm pretty sure he lives outside the United States. Goes by the name of Red Oscar. And he publishes this in Substack under Red Oscar Writes. It's entitled The Cost of Victory, a one-shot. A scrap of hull drifted across Kassarin's vision, twisted and scarred like all the rest, unremarkable. 10,000 ships floated, cracked and splintered by his hand. Everywhere he looked were mangled hulls, more numerous than the stars. How many had been his own? How many the enemy's? That was a question for historians, not Admiral Kassarin. He had done his duty. He had saved the Commonwealth. Admiral, is it true the Bulgarians requested peace talks? No. Are you sure? Positive. The man paced, his bespoke tailored suit shifting in the harsh lighting. Are you sure? He paused, turning to the Admiral with raised brows. Kassarin remained silent. I have here copies of official communiques from the Bulgarian High Command offering terms. He held up a wad of paper, his thumb partly obscuring the Bulgarian tiger. They are not official, the Admiral said. A white hair from his mustache caught his eye. He flattened it with a practiced motion. Spotlights bore down from marble pillars, illuminating the ancient stone and contemporary people, each out of place with the other. Have they been submitted to this court? Grand Magistrate Osiris peered down his oval spectacles, the other magistrates taking notice. Osiris in his white and his fellow judges in their black were at home in the High Court, as dusty as the picture frames holding oil paintings of their predecessors. There was no time. These communiques have only recently come to light. When? Magistrate Herat caught the barrister with an eagle stare. This morning. Submit all you have now. Continue your line of questioning. We will discard it as inadmissible if we find anything amiss, Herat called. Of course, Magistrate. He leered at Admiral Kassarin, the disdain impossible to mask. He marched toward the High Court bench with one wad of papers and set them down with a slap. Turning, the barrister daintily lifted a sheaf of papers from inside his pocket. Admiral Kassarin, judges, ladies and gentlemen, I will read the following from a diplomat of Bulgarian present at the planet Freya. He cleared his throat for effect. Honorable Commander, I offer terms beneficial to your triumphant nation. The Autarch and his high command accept defeat in this conflict and are willing to cede the systems of Freya, Halon, Matoi, Kosk, and Tverin, as well as agree to a non-aggression pact of 10 years in which our military capabilities will be constrained by treaties to be written at a later date. I pray, Honorable Commander, you accept these terms. The barrister turned, his waxen mask set, his eyes suitably misty. A clutch of women wept near the back of the court, nestled behind the great marble pillars under the shadow of the flag Kassarin had fought for, its twin-headed lion fluttering in the heat blowing from grates in the floor. What say you, Admiral? Spittle bubbled from between the legal expert's teeth at the last word. Kassarin regarded his prosecutor with the same disdain he did the Bulgarians. The leather of his chair creaked as he leaned forward. Do you know what was on the surface of Freya? His legal defense began to raise, but a sharp look from the Admiral held him down. An army of Bulgarians, starving and willing to surrender, the prosecutor answered. There was an army, all right, and a navy more than 6,000 ships strong, and a weapon that would have annihilated this planet like sugar and tea, vaporized. He clicked his fingers, just like that. And what proof of this do you have? Magistrate Herat groaned. He tapped his pen while the other magistrates tugged at the interruption. Osiris did not strike it down. Admiral Kassarin waited for the Herat's silence to strain the air, and when he heard a woman sniff, he said, I used it. That is my proof and my burden. The prosecutor's eyebrows shot up as a wave of indecent gasps fluttered through the High Court. Kassarin's defense hung his head, his advice ignored fully and totally. What record is there of this? Our victory, Magistrate. The total destruction of our enemy's military capabilities, the sand that stains the orbital path of a planet once called Freya, the 10,000 broken ships that circle that system star littered with our dead and theirs. Those ghosts are mine to be haunted by. Stain is mine to be reminded of every day in every smudge of ink and every drop of tea spilt. This Commonwealth will never thank me, not while I am alive, for perhaps it will grow to understand why. Admiral, Herat's voice choked on that stain of sand. How is it you survived? Kassarin peered up at the magistrate, the walnut bench obscuring the lower half of his visage. Has the court inspected my ship? It is a miracle I'm here. My ship, Widow's Grief, will never sail again. Her back is broken, her hull more bolts than plates. Her analytic cores is cracked, every porthole shattered, every missile bay twisted. 1,347 crewmen lost their lives getting home. A third of the crew, my crew, men and women I promised to return to their families. They died for this Commonwealth. Do not smear those 1,347 heroes because I dared to win a war. You speak of the dead on your ship, but what of the dead on Freya? How many is it, Admiral? How many ghosts do you carry around with you? I have heard that in the elite units, the ones the public aren't meant to know about, they tattoo tears on their faces for all the people they kill. How many tears must we paint on your face? The prosecutor said. Crann felt the words rush the air like a knife, and like a knife they bent against his armor, harmless and pathetic. You stand there playing with words, so desperate to win an argument, to show up your opponent, that you've lost sight of why. This is a game to you. It's not a game to me, he growled, teeth clenched. Freya was home to 3 million enemy combatants. A further 500,000 administration and logistics staff were responsible for those 3 million plus those scattered throughout the system and aboard more than 6,000 warships at anchor. Have you ever seen 6,000 ships, prosecutor? The stars vanish like you're standing in the center of Terrible on a summer's eve with all those towers of steel and neon lights that never fade where the sun never truly sets. At least 30 million combatants reside in those warships I mentioned, a further 10 million on our own. The non-combatant population was 6 billion. I know not how many of those worked on the Bulgarian weapon. Would you rather we were still at war? Would you rather more of our worlds and theirs burned in the midnight sky? How many more moons would you have liked to see glassed? How many more mothers had to mourn their sons without a body to bury? How many children have to grow up without fathers, without mothers? How many, prosecutor? How many? The prosecutor, in his fine suit neatly pressed, stroked his silk tie, a bead of perspiration rolling down from behind his ear. You believe you were right to slaughter over 6 billion souls? I won the war and saved 1 trillion lives. That alone makes me right. A silence descended upon the court, a silken veil masking a swirl of emotion. The prosecutor scratched his head, his breath held, and dared to break the quiet a moment too soon. His voice broke, and all that escaped him was a wheeze. He coughed. Excuse me, his words sliced through the veil. You killed 10 million of our own citizens? Yes, and every day I read 100 names and send personal letters of condolence to the families. You'll never reach the end. That's not why I do it. You killed 10 million Commonwealth citizens. Why? Admiral Crann drew his lips into a thin, sad smile. Prosecutor, when I gained access to the Bulgarian weapon, I had only a vague understanding of what it did. Each of those men and women who died defending our home earned the highest honors that day. They paid the ultimate price, and I must carry the burden that created. I do not relish killing. The weapon could have easily killed me along with everyone else. It didn't, though, not for lack of trying. 2,043 souls made it home alive. Not even enough to crew a warship, Magistrate Herat crowed, his beady eyes peering over the lip of polished wood. Hate lingered in those black beads. Quiet, Magistrate, clubbed Grand Magistrate Osiris. The Magistrate is right. The Bulgarian weapon has set our military back decades, centuries perhaps, but the weapon's destruction brings us peace. Had our enemy used the weapon, do you imagine the result would have been better? Crann growled. But they didn't, the prosecutor said. But they would have. It is foolish, idiotic, to leave a weapon that powerful in the hands of an enemy. Had peace been made with Bulgaria while that weapon survived, we would have never known rest. Fear would nibble at the edges of our minds, of our nation, slowly worming inwards until life was impossible to live for fear of annihilation at any moment. Justify it however you want, Admiral. I'll forfeit my remaining time. He straightened his tie and stepped away without so much as a glance at Crann. The barrister joined his team, plain-faced and silent. Thank you, Prosecutor, Grand Magistrate Osiris croaked, the long sleeves of his white coat creating peaks and valleys atop his desk. We will now deliberate. A verdict will be announced at sunset today. The air sparked with renewed tension. No one had expected such a swift deliberation after months of argument had been presented. Admiral Crann only present for a sliver of them. Chatter erupted forth from the observers, whether ministers of state, reporters, or interested individuals. The sudden volume rankled Crann. The admiral rose, his wrists in chains, and was guided out via a slim door to the holding room. The door closed and magnetically sealed, offering quiet once more. Grand Magistrate Osiris stood in the center of the room. A podium had been erected with a golden lectern, the twin-headed lions shimmering from it. Hundreds had poured between the marble pillars. The seats had been removed, and the galleries above opened. Cameras lined the back wall and hung from the ceiling, along with a meteor shower of microphones. Bodyguards shoved and elbowed people away from the War Minister and his subordinate on the front row, a key proponent in prosecuting Crann. The white-robed magistrate tapped the microphone, flanked by his black-robed colleagues, all sharing pained expression. Admiral Crann was shuffled in, his chains clinking as he climbed the witness stand. He hoped his family had stayed home and forgotten what day it was. Some things were best not witnessed. I, Grand Magistrate Osiris, along with Magistrates Harat, Philor, Jaskaltha, and now, have unanimously agreed the outcome of this trial, his voice boomed, silencing the legions stuffed between the marble pillars and oil portraits. Such a verdict as that we have chosen is not given lightly, and the weight of this trial cannot be understated. Over the last several months, we have bore witness to the most important trial of our Commonwealth in its 1,000-year history and likely forever. The evidence and argument we have heard is all public, and I am certain current and future historians will write reams about it and the people involved. Yet, I implore each and every one of you here now, consider the man who stands before us, the world we have recently emerged from, and remember the blood and toil our nation has endured for 12 long years. War takes from us our innocence, our joy, our friends, our family. It takes our kindness, generosity, and even our very humanity. Admiral Crann has many things, but I will not comment on those here, as I'm sure a million pens are already scribbling to define the man to someone else's liking. Instead, I am here to pass a verdict on whether the Admiral is guilty of war crimes, of murder on such a scale as to cease to be a tragedy and merely a statistic, and whether destroying a planet, knowingly or not, is a crime to begin with. Precedent will be set here today. I hope there will not be cause to reference it in the future. With that, this High Court of the Commonwealth and I, Grand Magistrate Osiris, condemn Admiral Crann to exile beyond the outer reaches to live out his days alone in obscurity, forbidden from returning to Commonwealth space, and prevented by our vast territories from traversing to any other known or unknown civilization within the galaxy on pain of death. A ship, fuel, and food will be provided to last 2,043 days, one for each of the people he brought back from the horrors of Freya. Beyond that, he is on his own. Osiris stepped back from the lectern, his eyes bloodshot and his jowls sagging. The other magistrates surrounded him as they retreated out of the courtroom. Exile, the war minister barked. No one has been exiled in 800 years. What is the meaning of this? Answer me. The bald and beardless man thrashed against the security in front of him. The security guard remained placid, his hands resting in the small of his back. The minister's bodyguards ushered him out, parting the crowd with polite tones and well-placed palms. What do you think, Admiral? Are you pleased with the verdict? Why do you think they spared you? Were you expecting execution? Reporters pecked and hawked as the crowd ebbed out through the tall black doors. Crann was left to the wave of questions and theories thrown about the room as the magistrates scurried out, their verdict delivered, their reasoning to be published at a later date. No one came to shuffle him off the witness stand. He surveyed the waiting eyes of reporters, young and old, their questions becoming a single mush of sound, like the Bazuran weapon as it crushed 10,000 warships and tore out the heart of a planet. Crann made to speak, and the change in his demeanor silenced the room. A nation that condemns its war veterans condemns itself to history. The Admiral stepped off the witness stand and made his own way to a sealed chamber. The hawking and hollering burst into greater fury, but he did not hear them as he faced his destiny beyond the outer reaches. My last piece here is a short poem, and it's of a much lighter tone than the last one. It's entitled A Curse Through Endless Hours, I Am Your Fate, by Mariana Bosarova, published in Catharsis Chronicles and Media.com. Don't touch my silk-spun hair in the morning light. With deadly nightshade I did weave it tight. Along the dry ravine I walk alone. My steps fall soft and leave no trace to show. Don't seek my steps. No sign is left, I swear. My hands alone I bandaged with such care. The earth beneath me trembled, hard as stone. Its rugged path slowed my pace, through flown. My hands, scratched raw by weeds along the way, I washed with morning dew, and faced the day. Don't think I'm just a flower crushed and bent. I braved love's trials and grown resilient. So venom shall not claim or trouble me. I wear my crown of thorns defiantly, a gift from you, a wandering soul astray, who left my endless questions with no say. On misty days we searched for paths to take, which night would steal, dreams we can't remake. We buried feelings deep within the night. They turned as bitter as poisons bite. You choose to turn your gaze from meeting mine, and sought your love afar, some distant sign. You burned against my pale and fragile skin, yet pledged your days to someone else's kin. So do not touch these braids of golden hue, nor dream of midnight kisses tried and true. I am no lover of your gift of flowers. I am your fate, a curse through endless hours. And she has a note here. In Bulgarian mythology, a special place is reserved for the woodland nymphs and fairy ladies named Samodiva. Since she further writes, my poem above is written from the perspective of such a magical lady. It is said that due to their beauty, they irresistibly draw men to them, yet sometimes they too fall in love. In those rare instances, they may be inclined to release their beloved, allowing them to return to the human world rather than condemning them to wander eternally between the two realms, the visible and the invisible, as servants to the fairy lady. They are ethereally beautiful, eternally young maidens with slender, graceful figures, long hair, and an enchanting gaze that can mesmerize or even kill. Hidden under their arms are delicate wings that allow them to fly. They are dressed in thin, translucent white tunics or white smocks, sandwiched a green belt, often adorned with rainbow colors, but predominantly green. This attire is key to their supernatural powers. If it is taken away, they become submissive to the person who possesses it. On their heads, they frequently wear wreaths made of fairy ladies' flowers, which are believed to have magical properties. In certain regions, it is believed that these fairy ladies are invisible beings, visible only to specific people. Those born on a Saturday night before All Souls' Day or Easter, children born at midnight on Christmas Eve, or during the unclean days between Christmas and Epiphany, and those who are children of a fairy lady and a mortal man, as well as four-eyed dogs with two contrasting spots above their eyes. So again, that's a little bit of Bulgarian fairy lore, and the poem is pretty good too. So with that, I'm going to close up shop here, as I usually say, and I will talk to you again here and bring you some more stories and poems, and probably after the elections next week. So look for me probably week after next. Sláinte. Guru Mahagat. Thank you for listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed the variety of stories and poems again this week. If you like the show, please like, subscribe, and reply, as this goes a long way towards reaching more listeners around the world. As a Shanké, I hope you will allow me to continue delighting you with a story or poem here under the crown of beatha. Maybe they will bring you a smile, take you away from your troubles for a time. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this Irish blessing as you go about your day. May your path rise up to meet you, and the sun warm your bonnet as you walk down the lane to the pub. May your friends and relations bring you a pint after you retell these stories and poems I give you here. Slán go fóill. Goodbye for now.